Hi, it's Malcolm, and today we're going to be talking about CCJ's County Court Judgements. This is something that you might find on your credit file if you fail to keep up payments on a bill or a credit agreement. You might see County Court Judgment appear on your credit report. And I'm joined by Wayne. Wayne, is it actually possible to get a mortgage with a CCJ?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, lenders are going to look at what factors were around it, when it was, how long ago since the CCJ was issued. Things like, have you satisfied it? And the general rule of thumb is, the further away you are from the date that was issued, the more likely you would be to be able to get the mortgage.
So I think there's a bit of a common misconception on CCJs that they're kind of squashed after 6 years. That's not quite the case, is it, technically?
It's not. What the 6 year thing tends to be how far back lenders will look at your credit history. I suppose the issue is if you've had a debt that was that went to a judgment and you are still paying it back, even if it's beyond 6 years ago. If it's obvious that you're still paying the debt back, that can still then come into the equation.
Because that's an ongoing. That could be
an ongoing commitment.
Yeah, that's right. So it's more that it hasn't disappeared. You just can't see it anymore because the lenders aren't looking back quite that far. When we see county court judgments on a customer's credit report, what type of items would they have been for?
Very often, historically, it used to be things like you'd cancelled it, but it turns out that you didn't cancel it, and often the communications company will then take a judgment for any outstanding amount. And
talking of communications, we hear quite a lot that the letter that you're meant to get through to say that your application is going to court and you've got your right to kind of pay it off and stuff never quite land on the doormat.
Well, especially if you've been moving addresses and things like that. If you've not updated your address with if you've moved address, the communication company has got an old address. They might have written to your old address. You might not have had it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't a valid reason for doing it in the first place. So, because a lot of people say, well, can we get it removed, sort of thing. Well, it's very difficult. You've got to be able to prove that it should never have been issued in the first place. And just because you've moved house doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been issued in the first place. So I think you've got to have pretty solid grounds to be able to go back to the court and prove that actually this was invalid in the way that it was done. More often than not, you've just got to pay it.
Yeah, I mean, I've known it happen, but it is in the minority. So once it's on there, it tends to be on there. If the CCJ is still showing on your credit report, but it's 5 years ago rather than last year, would you have more chance of getting a mortgage? Yeah,
I think, as I say, generally speaking, the further away it is, the more likely you would be of getting a mortgage. Certainly some of the non-standard lenders, if you like, the not quite mainstream lenders, the specialist lenders, if you like, would typically tend to look at that. And again, they'll all have their own rules, but some will say if it's more than 2 years, or some will say it's more than 3 years. Or they will look at how many you've got. If it's just a one-off, and they can see that it's just a one-off blip. Whereas if you've got multiple CCJs, then that might be more difficult, because that will tend to sort of indicate that there'd maybe be a more systematic reason for you not paying your bills, sort of thing.
I suppose the other thing as well is if it's just happened, the lender it's more difficult for them to tell if you're going to have another CCJ for something else.
Exactly. If it's something that happened 5 years ago and nothing else has happened since, and they can see that your payment history has been good since then, they're probably going to be happy that it's not going to happen again. Whereas if it happened a year ago or 6 months ago or whatever, how do we know it's not going to happen again?
And if you had a default, if you had a county court judgment and we can only get you a mortgage with one of these specialist lenders where the rates are higher and potentially the arrangement fees are higher, will you be stuck with that mortgage like forever?
No, I mean, a lot of those lenders know that you are probably only going to them because you're in a particular set of circumstances. As you say, they will charge you the extra fees probably, they will charge you a higher rate probably, they might need a bigger deposit. But they know that they're going to make that money out of you for the 2 years, for example, that you're with them, and then you've now improved your credit report, you're even further away from the original event. If you've done things properly, you've kept your mortgage payments up to date, your credit score's improved enormously. It might be that the old CCJ has now dropped off your credit report altogether, and it gives you much more of an opportunity to, if you like, get back into the mainstream with a high street name.
And what about satisfying an unsatisfied CCJ? So we've got an amount of cash we've accumulated saving towards the deposit. We've found out we've got a CCJ. Should we use some of that cash to satisfy that CCJ, or should we keep that cash towards a deposit? Will it help our credit score? I
think it depends on the CCJ. For example, some of the high street lenders, if you have a small, and by small typically I mean maybe less than £250, if you have a small satisfied CCJ that they can see as a one-off, that it may well be worth satisfying that. If you've got more serious amounts of money than that, or multiple CCJs, a lot of the specialist lenders, it almost doesn't matter to them whether it's satisfied or not.
The damage is done.
The damage is done, and what they're looking at is how long ago was it?
Have you turned that corner?
Exactly.
You had this life event, these issues happen, but you've been squeaky clean for the last 24, 36 months, you'd have a decent chance.
Exactly. I think the general answer is, if you can do it and you can afford to do it, then it can't be a bad thing to settle it. But if your circumstances are such that you're probably going to have to go down the specialist lender route anyway, actually to them it probably won't make an awful lot of difference to their decision.
Okay, so there we have it then. So it's not impossible to get a mortgage with a CCJ. The longer ago it was in the past, the easier you're going to find it. And if you've got to go to a specialist lender, you will probably be looking, at least for the first few years, at paying a high rate of interest on your mortgage. Thanks for watching. If you're in the market for mortgage advice, please drop me an email, malcolm@ukmoneyman.com, or give us a call, and please subscribe to our channel.